Okay, so let's jump right in. There's this quiet but pretty significant revolution happening on our streets. The very people who are the engine for apps like Uber and Lyft, well, a lot of them are planning their escape. And they're not just quitting the gig. No, they're breaking away to build their own private driving businesses. So today, we're going to break down exactly why this is happening and, how they're actually pulling it off. This quote from a veteran driver, it just cuts right to the chase. You've got this two-front war going on. On one side, their pay is getting squeezed harder and harder. And on the other, there's this technology deadline that's just looming over their heads. It's a real pressure cooker situation, and it's forcing a pretty radical change. Which brings us to the big question, right? When you're faced with all these challenges, what's the game plan? How are these drivers, these independent contractors, actually taking back control and forging their own path forward? All right, first up, the driver's dilemma. Look, to really get why they're planning an escape, you have to understand the problem, and it all starts with the money. For so many drivers, it just feels like the game is rigged. The platforms hold all the cards, and they're constantly changing the rules on how you earn. And get this isn't some hypothetical. This is a real story from a real driver. It was a rainy day, demand was through the roof. A passenger gets charged $78 for a 13-minute trip. The driver's cut? He figured maybe $7, maybe $10 if he was lucky with a surge. That huge gap, that is exactly where all the frustration starts to build. And this isn't just about a few bad rides here and there. It's a pattern. Drivers are reporting this consistent year after year drop in pay. And it's across every single service level, from the basic Uber X all the way up to the premium stuff like Black and XL. The bottom line is simple. Whatever you earned for a trip last year, you're earning less for it this year. This number is just, wow. It really shows you how low the offers have gotten. One driver literally sat there and counted the offers pinging his phone all day. A staggering 90% of them were for less than $10. And a lot of those were for trips that were miles away, through heavy traffic. It's just not worth it. Okay, so this brings up the obvious question, right? If the pay is that bad and the system feels so unfair, why do people stick around? Why do they keep driving? I mean, it's a fair point, and it's something critics always ask. But the answer, surprisingly, isn't about the money. It's about something that most traditional jobs, in retail or fast food, they just can't offer. It all boils down to one word: flexibility. The flexibility is just unparalleled. You really are your own boss. You set your own hours. If a family emergency pops up, you just log off. You don't have to ask a manager for permission. There's no job interview, no corporate training to sit through. For millions of people, that kind of freedom is worth the low pay, but, only up to a certain point. Now let's talk about the other big pressure, the automation ticking clock. Because on top of the pay problems, there's this existential threat that adds a real sense of urgency to everything. The robots are coming. And listen, a lot of veteran drivers, they don't see this as some far-off sci-fi future. They see a hard deadline. The general feeling is that they've got about 5 years, maybe until 2030, before companies like Waymo and Tesla's robo-taxis make human drivers on these platforms pretty much obsolete. This quote really says it all. This isn't about panic. It's just a practical, clear-eyed realization. The writing is on the wall, and the smart drivers, they know they need an exit strategy. They need a plan B before that clock runs out. So that brings us to the solution, the escape route. We've laid out the problems. The pay keeps shrinking, and an automated future is right around the corner. So what are they building? What's the way out? At its core, the idea is actually pretty simple. You just cut out the middleman. Instead of being this anonymous contractor for a giant tech company, you become a small business owner. You're contracting directly with your own list of clients. And honestly, this is the genius of it. This model lets drivers keep the one thing they actually love about the gig, that incredible flexibility, while fixing everything they hate. By going private, they get to set their own prices, they build real relationships with their customers, and they finally take back control of their own financial future. So, how do you actually do this? How do you build this business from scratch? Well, there are really two sides to it. First, you've got to deal with the official rules, the bureaucracy. And second, you have to master the hustle of actually building a customer base. So let's just use Connecticut as an example. To operate legally as a private driver there, you need what's called a public passenger endorsement. That just means you have to meet the age and license rules, pass background and medical checks, and fill out the right paperwork. It's a defined process to become a totally legit transportation business. But look, the paperwork, that's only half the battle. Then comes the real hustle. You have drivers who are actively converting passengers they pick up on Uber and Lyft into their first private clients. They're coming up with business names, setting up business bank accounts, and building marketing lists so they can talk directly to their customers and really grow their own brand. All of this leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? What we're seeing with these drivers, it might just be the start of a massive trend. Are we actually witnessing the future of skilled work? A future where people use these gig platforms, not as a career, but as a launch pad to escape, build their own brand, and truly, finally, become their own boss.